So, Mark, good to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Daddy. It's nice to share some time with you both.
So, Mark, can you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into coaching, and your journey so far?
Yeah, sure. My education, my university education is as a teacher. So here in the U.S., oftentimes, as a high school teacher, those teachers are also coaching sport after school, and that's kind of the path that I took. So back a long time ago, when I was a high school teacher for 7 years, I was also a high school coach, and I did that for 7 years. And then at the end of my time as a high school teacher, the last 2 years, I was teaching at a high school in Maine, but then I was an assistant men's soccer coach at a university up there. So 2 years doing that, and then I became a women's coach, coaching down at a small school in New Hampshire called Franklin Pierce, and that was my first collegiate head coaching job. I was coaching the women's soccer team, and I was the assistant coach for women's basketball, and I also have a great love for basketball. So at small schools here in the U.S., oftentimes the jobs are combination jobs. You have to do more than one thing, and my job to start with was coaching women's soccer as well as coaching women's basketball. And then I was there for 6 or 7 years. We had some pretty good success, had an opportunity to then move on to a Division I school called the University of Hartford, and was there for, again, 6 or 7 years, and then left there to go to Philadelphia and to have the chance to coach my first Icelandic player. Dadi, you'll remember Margaret Olaf's daughter. So she was, I brought her to the U.S. to play.
Very good player.
Yeah, at that time she was quite good, and probably the first professional player to come over and play as a pro. And again, Dadi, I don't know if you know, but I had another young woman who's represented Iceland play with me, named Raquel Carvelson, American Icelandic or Icelandic American, whichever you prefer.
She's Icelandic, of course.
Yeah, okay. And so she played for me in the Philadelphia Charge of the Women's Pro League, and left there and had a chance to coach the U.S. U19 national team for a year, and then have been at Florida State ever since. So had quite an opportunity to coach at a lot of different levels, jump around quite a bit, and experience an awful lot with an awful lot of great players and great assistant coaches.
Funny how many of the guys we're talking to seem to have some sort of background as teachers.
Yeah, and I think that there's something to be said for that, right? You're comfortable in the teaching environment, and my master's degree is actually in learning styles. So I think that it does help out an awful lot in teaching, dealing with kids that learn in one style or another, and being able to touch upon those different styles, and not being so rigid that we don't have the flexible thinking to do that.
At Franklin Pierce, you built like a national powerhouse. You had success, as you said. You did it by recruiting internationally, not the least. So, and you have continued to do so. How did this start in the beginning?
Well, when I got to Franklin Pierce, there were 2 Swedish players on the team, and they were 2 of the best players on the team. And, that was my first experience coaching college players. So when I got there, I kind of looked around and I thought, okay, well, I need to figure out where am I going to go recruiting. And I'd go to all of these big tournaments, and I'd be standing there on the sideline with all of the top teams in the country, North Carolina, Notre Dame, all of their coaches would be there. And I'd be looking at the same players they're looking at and thinking, well, there's no chance that I can get those top American kids, U.S. national team kids, to come to Franklin Pierce. So it didn't take me long to think, well, look, I got these 2 Swedish kids. Maybe I need to look abroad. Maybe I need to look somewhere else. And I had the chance to travel a lot in my early 20s with boys' high school soccer teams to Europe, and they'd go for 10-day trips all over the world. And the guy who took me with him, John Mitchell's his name, he was my mentor. He kind of, showed me around the world a little bit. He opened up a whole different way of looking at life for me. And so I sat down with the 2 Swedish kids in Franklin Pierce, and I said, well, tell me about your background and how are you compared to the other kids in Sweden? And the kid who was one of our top players at Pierce told me she was playing in the 4th division in Sweden. And I said, 4th division? I said, common sense would tell me that there's a Division 3, 2, and 1 above that are better players. And she said, oh, there are. Okay. So long story short, she connected me to reach out to Sweden and the federation. And I said, well, is there anyone that you can think of that I could reach out to? And she told me, yeah, there's this woman. I think she's really open-minded. She's famous. And I had no idea at the time who she was. I didn't hardly know who Michelle Akers or Mia Hamm was at that time because I was on the men's side of the game. And she says, Pia Sundahaga. And I said, Pia Sundahaga, who's that? Okay. So I called the federation and I asked for Pia, and they connect me to her. And I explained to Pia who I am and what I'm interested in doing. And she invited me to come to Sweden and that she would make arrangements for me to see all of these different games. And she'd introduce me to her friends that were other coaches and see if we could give some of these Swedish kids the American experience. So I got on a plane and I flew into I think I flew into Copenhagen, then got from Copenhagen into Helsingborg, which is where my player was from. And then we made the drive. The player and I kind of drove all over the place, meeting one suite after the next. And finally we ended in Stockholm. And I ended up staying with none other than Pia Sundhaga. So Pia was a wonderful ambassador, a wonderful host. She introduced me to people all over the place. And a year later, I brought into Franklin Pierce 3 top level international players. And we went from being 8 wins and 9 losses to 20 wins and 4 losses or 2 losses or something in 1 year. And that kind of opened the door for, all right, well, this is a big world. There's a lot of good players out there, and let's go from there. And obviously, as you know, Dadi, it certainly opened the world up to the relationship I now have with Pia Sundhaga, who came over and was my assistant coach in the WSA and later took our U.S. national team to great success.
So it teaches us also a little bit about not fishing in the same pools as your rivals.
That was absolutely part of it. I looked at it and I thought, there's no way we can, win the war, recruiting war in that pool. We need to go and we need to find a different place to go and find players. And it ended up working out pretty well for us.
So the U.S. women have been a powerhouse, but what do the international players bring to the mix?
Well, I think that, and again, it's a bit of a generalization, but I think that the U.S. Women's national team was initially founded with, of course, wonderful players, but founded mostly with the idea of mentality and physical fitness and strength and power. And even to this day, I think part of the reason that they're as successful as they are is a combination of their soccer quality, but a big part of it also is the mentality and the fight and the competitive spirit, the athletic quality, the depth of players that we have. But when I look at many of these international players, the level of sophistication that they have in the game is unique. We've had here at Florida State a number of players that are different types of players, the difference makers. Most recently, the player Dana Castellanos, when people see her play, she's reading the play 2 or 3 passes ahead of the rest of the team. And I think that there are many international players that have maybe a little bit better soccer IQ than some of our kids here.
Well, in Iceland and in other places in Europe, there has been hasn't respect towards college soccer. We know good players have come through that system, but are there questions about the packed season and the off season in the spring? What are the benefits for players who go to play in the States?
Well, I certainly can understand some of the criticism that would come for, people kind of looking and thinking, well, you're playing a 4-month season. I agree that is part of the case, but there are many, like our team at Florida State, that we haven't set up our structure like that. I think that if you look at what we're doing, you would think it would kind of replicate that of a professional environment, where in the off season, it's all about player development. And we are playing 1 game every week. So we have a rule that allows us to have our kids who have graduated come and play against our own kids. So what we do is every Friday in the spring, we bring in all of these kids that were top players, or they come in and they play against our team. So every Friday, our players are getting a really meaningful game, high-level game. So during the course of a year, our players are probably playing in the range of 40 or 50 games. The benefit, as I see it, is that in the spring, it's really a period of development. It's the opportunity for us, without having a huge consequence in terms of preparation for game, it's an opportunity for these players to really develop. And you know, you folks over there have Dagny Brynjar's daughter, and I don't think that there's no better example in the world that I can give anyone than Dagny. Dagny came to us as a talent with an enormous amount of potential. She came in, and her freshman year, she did a good job for us, but she was a good player, not a great player, but a good player. But the spring is what really afforded her the opportunity for the growth that she made during the course of her time there. And I would maintain that in terms of a player actually developing, the formula that we've created is a great formula for player development. The kids are getting a meaningful game throughout the course of an entire year, but they're also getting some really good training with the development piece.
Is this maybe something that we need to be mindful of with young players in the age of 16 to 22, that, you know, they need to have time to develop, you know, and work on their strengths and weaknesses?
You know, Daddy, I think all over the world, we're all so concerned with winning and losing that sometimes we learn the focus about of just the player development. And, you know, fortunately for me, I'm on the backside of my career. I'm not a 20-year-old guy anymore that's doing this where, you know, everything has to be about winning. With these players that I'm recruiting, the message that I'm giving them is, look, we want to win. We're going to win. But my concern for you is I want to help to place you in a professional environment after your university stuff is done. I want you to go and live your dream, be a pro player, play in your national team, have the experience that will be the best experience you could ever have, and have no regrets. And when I look at the volume of players that we've had go through our program, we probably have right now 30, 40 players that have played at Florida State that are playing as pros. And, you know, I think that the percentage and the development piece that we've found has worked very well for our kids.
And you're, no, sorry.
Sorry, is this general for college football or college soccer, that player or coaches are not only result-minded, but also development-minded?
Well, I don't think that's unique to college. I think that everywhere in the world, everyone seems to be pretty result-minded, whether it's a club coach or a national team coach or whatever. And, you know, when I was coaching the U19 U.S. national team, certainly development was in the back of my mind, but winning the World Cup was in the forefront of my mind, and putting together the pieces that were going to help us win the World Cup, or probably in your case, European Championships, or qualifying for European Championships and beyond, has to be the primary thought. So I think probably it's not so common to be as concerned with development and maybe a little bit more concerned with the results in every league everywhere in the world. So I think we've just been able to have a bit of a different vision. And but I will also say there are a lot of American coaches that are concerned with development, and they are doing a good job helping their players get better. Much like I'm sure in Iceland, there are a lot of folks that are helping to create and establish a high level of play with their players.
So it's not just your players who have an international flavor. You also had international coaches on your staff through the years. Is that important?
Well, I think it is. I think that, you know, one of the things that has been a guiding light for me is that I want to go out and I want to find the best. I want to surround myself with the best. And right now we have a Japanese coach on our staff named Imaizume, and Ima was the technical director of Japan. And as you know, Ima, Dadi, that if you're a technical director of Japan, you got to be pretty good at technical development, because in Japan they're pretty good. And Emo was also a national team coach. He coached the U19 national team. He was an assistant for the senior team. So he has quite a great background in the game. And he brings a whole different dimension to our team. So when it comes to individual player development, I don't know if there's anyone better in the world than he is. And so if I can find people who are experts in certain things and put them and expose our players to these people that are expert in certain things, then our kids are going to have a great learning experience. For me, it's not a competition. Is my background better than theirs, or is theirs better than ours? It's, you know, am I clever enough to manage all of their strengths and put all of the strengths together, hide all of our weaknesses with our staff, and let them do what it is that they're very good at.
So we had a big momentum going on in the women's soccer before the COVID crisis. What were the nations that you were looking towards that you think are doing interesting work within the women's soccer?
Boy, I'll tell you, in Europe, you guys have done a great job of your development in the last 10 years. I mean, when I first started in the women's soccer 20-something years ago, England was not a power. They were actually very average. France was not a power. Spain wasn't a power. You know, in Iceland, you guys had Margaret Ólafsdóttir and a couple of others. And now I look and I see the players that you guys have helped to produce, and Sarah Gunnarsdóttir, and many of these players are just top level kids. So I think that all throughout Europe, the development in the last 10 or 15 years has been amazing. The sleeping giant, as we know, on probably both the men's and the women's side, continues to be Africa, right? If you look at the continent of Africa and you see some of these women's teams and the quality of the athletes, and now they're starting to get some discipline, and now they're starting to have a little bit of more collective play. Those groups are really special, and again, you know, the Asian area of the world has been fantastic too. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that you know, the world powers were, you know, the U.S. and China and Norway and then Germany for a while. And you know, there is a shift going on. You know, many of these the Korean countries are both quite good. Of course, Japan has risen to the top at different times. So for me, it's an exciting time to be involved in the women's football, to watch all of this development. There are really good players coming up all over the place, and it would be a mistake for me to also not to mention Sweden. Sweden has been a world power and had a bit of a lull for a while, and has come back again. So a lot of great stuff going on out there, and I'm hopeful that this COVID isn't going to knock the momentum out of what's gone on. And I think economic times are going to be a little bit different and a little bit more challenging. And my hope is that these clubs the men's clubs will continue to support their women's teams and give these players the opportunity for such growth.
Well, Mark, your players, they tend not to only speak of you as their coach, but also like a mentor. And you seemed willing to both share with others and try to help others personally and in a professional development even after leaving as players. Is this a conscious, you know, thing you're conscious about, or is it your character, or is it both?
Yeah, you know, Dadi, I don't know. It's certainly a part of who I try to be. You know, when I recruit these players, the goal is to help them live their dreams. I mean, from a selfish point of view, it's for us to try and win games, and but it's more than that. And you know, when these players have a chance to come in and we get to know each other and watch their personal growth and watch their development, both as soccer players and as people, yeah, it's a great source of pride for me. I enjoy watching them grow up in front of my eyes and seeing them have the successes on and off the field, and I love to help them in any way that it's possible. You know, again, with Dagny in particular, you know, when I met with her the first time, she didn't say 5 words. Her sister carried the conversation, and her sister Hjalti told me, "Don't worry. Once Dagny, you get to know her, she won't shut up." And I was thinking, boy, okay, we got a long way to go then. And let me tell you, now when I'm speaking with Dagny, Hjortis was absolutely right. She's talking Dagny's talking all the time. But it's been great to watch Dagny and Berglund and Eland continue their growth and their play. And, that's part of the hope, right? Those are the joys of the back end of the coaching, where you get to see these young women mature and grow up and then go on and realize their dreams, see them getting married, having children, and continuing to be part of their lives in whatever fashion makes sense to both of us.
So you're not just coaching the player, you're also coaching the person, so to speak.
I hope so. I think that we've probably the evidence in the relationship is the fact that we're all very friendly today. It's one thing to go and just play for a coach, and then afterwards there's no relationship. I've been texting with Berglund and Eland and Dagny from Iceland, all within the last month, checking on them, checking on their families, coming back and forth to one another and having conversation. But that's the case with all the kids from throughout the world. It's a lot of good people involved in the game, and I think at the end of the day, we're all people first, and the fact that we share the football and share a desire to be good at what we're doing is a bonus.
You mentioned one of your mentors, but have there been people who have influenced you in a similar fashion?
Of course. One of the first things, you had mentioned earlier, Dadi, that I'm pretty open with sharing ideas and trying to help other people learn and grow in the game. And that's very true. And the reason for that is that when I got my first job at Franklin Pierce, I didn't know a whole lot. I thought I knew a lot, but I didn't know a whole lot. And I watched our men's team at Franklin Pierce play, and they were playing at a school called Southern Connecticut. And I fell in love with the way Southern Connecticut played. I watched them, and they were so good with the ball. And as a player, I wasn't a great player, but I was a coach on the field. I was thinking the game. My technique was good, but I wasn't athletic enough to be a high-level player. So my weakness was that I just wasn't fast, and I wasn't quick, and I wasn't strong. But reading the play and being able to deliver the ball where I wanted, those were my strengths. So I always had an appreciation for players that could read the game and that had good technique. So I'd watch the Southern Connecticut men's team play, and they were just beautiful to watch. And at the time, my brother was living down in Connecticut, and he was working camps for the head coach of Southern Connecticut, named Bob Krikorian. And I said to my brother, "Hey, Dave, talk to those guys." I said, "I don't know them at all. I've never met them. I'm a fan. Ask them if I could come down. They could talk to me a little bit about how they develop the play and things like that." So my brother goes and speaks with Coach Krikorian, and Coach says, "Yeah, tell your brother to come down." Well, my brother was working at the camp. He said, "Tell him to come down tomorrow, and I'll share some time with him." So I drove down the next day to Connecticut, which was easy, 2.5-hour drive. I got down there sometime in the afternoon, and Coach Krikorian spent with me from whatever time in the afternoon I showed up till 2 o'clock in the morning, going over different patterns of play, breaking it down to the initial start of the passing and receiving activities, body shape, all of these things that we're doing now at Florida State, and giving me a clue about how to open space, how to move players, how to be deceptive, all things that as a player maybe I did some of, but wasn't really conscious of and just did. So I sat there and we stayed up and we talked and talked and talked and talked. Next morning, got up and I headed back to Franklin Pierce with a notebook full of ideas. And the next person that I had a similar experience with was Pia Sundhage. When I went to Sweden and went to her house that evening, we stayed up and maybe had a beer or two, and we talked through the night about all kinds of different elements of play. And what I know is I haven't invented the game. I didn't invent it, and I didn't invent any of it. The question is, I've been a very good thief. I watch, I pay attention, and I steal great ideas from great minds. And if I come up with one or two original ideas here and there, then great. But paying attention and being a good listener is a pretty good quality, I think.
You have to be sure that you're stealing from the right people.
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, that is also the other part of the equation. So when I sat with Bob Krikorian at the end of the day, I said to him, you know, Coach, I'm not going to share any of this with our men's soccer coach. Our men's team and the Southern Connecticut men's team were the two biggest rivals. And what he said to me is, Mark, you can share this information with anyone you want to. There's no problem. Share it as you want. And what I found out years later was it's not about the drill. It's not about any of the other stuff. It's the information you're giving to the players when you're doing the drill, right? So you can have your kids out there doing some activity, but if you're not giving them the right information, it doesn't make any difference. So as coaches, it's our interpretation of the game. It's the way that we're interpreting the game and how we want it played. So, you know, finding Coach Krikorian and finding Pia and their willingness to share all of these ideas and talk about the game was magnificent. But if we didn't interpret it in a way that it would help our team, well, then none of it matters. And I will also say to you, one of the other things that I've been very successful in my mind at is I've chosen very good assistant coaches. And I think that any young coach that comes to me and is asking for, all right, look, I've just become a head coach. Mark, what can you do to help us? You've had some success. Tell us what it is that I can do. What are the most important elements? And the first thing my point to them always is, I don't care what you have to do, you need to hire the right assistant coaches. If you get the wrong assistant coaches, you're going to spend all of your time correcting whatever it is that they're doing or babysitting them, and you're going to have all kinds of problems. And when I say the right assistant coaches, I'm not talking about an assistant coach that agrees with you. I'm talking about an assistant coach that is going to work really hard, that's not afraid of having some conflict and having discussion. If my assistant coaches just say to me every time I have an idea, oh, that's a great idea, Mark, that's a great idea, what do I need them for? You know, we need to have people that are going to look at it and say, hey, you know, what is it? We need to look at this differently. And again, I think being a good listener is an important part to being a good coach. Okay.
So obviously, these are things or qualities that you look for in your assistant coaches and your staff. But having worked with a large group of top players, what are the things that you're looking for while recruiting new players?
So I think that it's easy to say, you know, we want the whole package. We want the player that can do it all. But there are very few of those players at 17 or 18 years old out there. I think probably the first thing is that we're looking at is the kid has to be athletic enough. They have to be, you know, a kid who's really way too slow at our level, at the international level, you just can't play if you're too slow. So no matter how well you read the play or how good your technique is, if you can't cover some ground in the modern game, that's a big problem. For me, I'm looking for the soccer IQ. In other words, how intelligent are they on the field? Can they see the passes? Is their spacing good? Is there quality with the ball good enough? So the soccer IQ coupled with the technical quality are really important. So, you know, here in the U.S., they talk about the 4 pillars of the game: the athletic piece, the psychological piece, is the kid mentally tough, the technical and the tactical piece. At the end of the day, I think that we're looking for them to be exceptional at least one of those areas and at least be good in all the other areas.
Okay, good. I know for sure, though, that you have bet on players, having not maybe seen them play a lot, but you heard like character references and you got some feeling about their character. I'm thinking about Pauliina Mittinen from Finland and Yuji from China, and both of them did really well for you, although you didn't maybe see them play a lot.
Yeah.
How important are character references in scouting? Because I know both of them got good character references.
I think character reference is really important, but also to both of your points, doing your homework is really important. If we're going to invest a scholarship in a kid, I need to be 100% sure that it's a winner. And part of that is making sure that they are a good kid, that they are going to come in and they're going to take care of their academics and they're going to work hard. You know, before I'm prepared to offer any kid a scholarship, I'm on the phone with a lot of people talking about them. And, you know, Dadi, as you know, before we brought Yuji in here, I was speaking with the national team coach. I spoke with, you know, Yuji's national team coaches. I spoke with you. I spoke with the Ziggy. I spoke with Gao Hong. the Sun Wen. I mean, I was on the phone with everyone that I knew in China from all of my experience. And in the end, all of you steered me in the right direction, saying that this is a top quality kid, and that you know, she's got the character, but she's also smart, and as a player, she'll be quite good. And that certainly proved to be the case. And you know, even back in the days recruiting Pauliina Miettinen, that was a long time ago. But I went to Finland and I saw her, and I met her, and I sat face to face with her, and I spoke with other Finnish players that I had already had on my team that knew her and spoke to both her ability and her character. So, you know, sometimes we get the luxury of seeing these players in person multiple times. Sometimes it's only once or twice, and sometimes it's a lot through technology. But having good contacts and having trustworthy contacts is vital to our success. Probably the same in the club game, right? If you're going to bring a kid in, you need to make sure that they're going to be what you expect them to be.
Can you talk about the gladiator clip? Oh.
Yeah. So when I visited Pauliina, and this was back, oh boy, let's see, that must have been in the early 90s. I was sitting with Pauliina, and we had been talking soccer and so on. And she said, "Hey, I have something else that I have in my background." And she went on to finish Gladiators. Do you have that show in Iceland?
No, actually not.
Okay, so in the U.S. we had this American Gladiator program, and obviously it was in Finland as well, where they had these enormously talented, athletic, strong male and females, and they were, you know, gladiators. And at the end of the day, one contestant would go against one of these all-stars in different activities. And Pauliina showed me, she was on the show, and she was matched up with this woman that was just an incredible physique. You could tell that the woman was strong and whatever. And Pauliina was doing an activity competing against this muscular, strong, athletic woman. And Pauliina broke the woman's arm in the competition and won the competition. And I looked at it and I said, "Oh, geez, okay, well, if we ever get in a fight, I think that we're going to be a pretty good spot." But it showed Pauliina's mentality and competitive spirit, physical prowess, and so on. And I had a Swedish player coming in that I was hoping to pair with Pauliina as dual strikers. We played 4-4-2 back in those days, and the Swedish player was the beautiful player, just wonderful technique. And I thought, geez, there can't be a better combination of players between Pauliina's physical qualities and the other young woman named Pernilla, her technical and tactical qualities. This is going to be a great combination, and it proved to be, as we ended up winning the national championship that year with those two leading the way for us. So yeah, Pauliina, that recruitment was a little bit different. So
what if you scout a player who has outstanding physical abilities and potential, but questionable character references? What would your approach be to that?
Typically, those kids we stay away from. You know, we're at Florida State. We don't have to take a chance on a kid that may be a little bit of a questionable kid. You know, we can go out and get kids that are good students, good kids, and sometimes we make mistakes. I mean, you know, we have to say that. But if I know that a kid is maybe a potential problem, then I'll stay away from it. Sometimes you just don't know. But anytime that we get involved with that, those are team killers. You know, one bad kid can really undermine the essence of the team. And I think that in order for us to be successful and have the success over time, you need to have good kids all pulling in the same direction, all willing to compete together and fight together. And, you know, so maybe a talented kid that maybe is lacking character Florida State may not be the right place for him.
I remember the first year you had Dagny, you were working a lot with her on scanning before turning, and you did that intensively. Can you tell us a little bit about how your staff, I mean, you had MSMA then. Can you tell us how they work together on player and team development? Sure.
So at the end of our regular season, it's in December, I'll sit with each of the players following the national championship game, and we'll sit down between the player and my staff and I, we'll come up with a list. So it's a bit of an activity for our staff. I'll say to the staff, all right, look, you guys need to go and come up with a list of all of the different elements we want each player to be working on through the course of the spring. but I'll give that same homework assignment to each player. So at that time for Dagny, it was, Dagny, go home or give some thought to, come back into my office and come in with a list on things that you think you need to get better at. What are the areas that you want to improve on? And one of the things that we had on the list for Dagny that, as you can see today, certainly we did a pretty good job with, was I told her we wanted to make her the most dominant player, aerial player in the world, the best heading player in the world. And that when she came to us for a tall kid, she was very average heading the ball. And so the other thing, as you mentioned, was looking around and scanning and understanding where the pressure is coming from, how to identify and solve pressure, far foot control away from pressure, all of those different elements and stuff. But we sat down as a staff before I met with Dagny to go over her thoughts, and I came up with a list with the assistance of my team of coaches. And then I'd sit with Dagny and I'd deal with all the players and listen to what they think are the areas that they need to work on. And we'd add that onto the list. And I'd say to them, like I did to Dagny, look, we want you to be better in the air. We want you to be dominant in the air. We want you to be the best that you can be. With Dagny, we also talked about way to the final pass. We talked about getting in the box to score the goals because we thought she had the quality to score the goals, but now let's add the composure of being a goal scorer rather than, everyone can score a goal, but are you picking the right spot or are you just kicking it as hard as you can and relying upon luck? And those were things that we looked at with her. So the methodology is the same with all of the players. I'll come up with my list, my assistants will come up with their list, I'll sit with my assistants, we'll put our coaches list together, I'll sit with the players, listen to what they have to say, we'll put all of it together, then we're all on the same page, and that's what the spring is going to be devoted to for the most part, that Monday through Thursday, we're going to work on each of these areas, and that's a lot of time for us to be able to take those players and to work on that, and that's why our kids have had so much growth individual. I think that across the country, the comment that we get from the pro coaches here in the U.S. Is the most flattering comment that they could possibly give. Our kids are the most prepared to be pros. When our kids go into the pro league, every one of them is ready to be a pro. They've been treated like a pro. They've been handled like a pro. We've been honest with them and giving them good feedback and honest feedback. But I think the development piece is an important part of that.
Good. So FSU is one of the top sports universities in the States and strong tradition in many sports. And you came in to a program that wasn't there, but is now fighting for national titles. Have you created pressure on yourself from the institution as a result?
Yeah, Dadi, it's really interesting. My dad said to me, so I went into to Florida State, and in our first year, my dad always had a great sense of humor and always kind of have some fun with me and stuff. And he'd say, hey, don't do too well your first year because you're going to set a bar too high for yourself that you're going to have to try and maintain. And I thought, well, okay, I think it's okay. We'll be okay. So in our first year, I had a great staff. I brought in some really good players, and we ended up going to the Final Four and created a very high bar for ourselves. We made it look much easier than it is. It's not that easy, and it's not that easy to get back to the Final Four. And, that's been a big concern. So for each of my first 3 years, we went to the Final Four and kind of looking at it and saying, geez, maybe we did create an artificial level of expectation that may not be attainable. But fortunately, we've been very consistent. I've been there for 15 seasons, and we've been in the Final Four 9 years. And probably the thing that we're the most proud of is that, there are about 320 schools in the U.S. in Division I playing women's soccer. And every year for the 15 years we've been here, we've ended in the top 15 in the country, which is really difficult. I don't think anyone else has done that, but I think the consistency that we've played at a high level while playing a beautiful style of soccer and helping our kids to grow and then go on and play as pros are probably the things that we're the most proud of.
Mark, thank you very much for taking the time. And,
well, it's a pleasure.
And yeah, very good to talk to you.
Well, nice to speak with both of you, and I hope you all stay safe through this pandemic. It looks like all of you folks in Iceland have figured this out better than we have in the U.S., so hopefully we can catch up to you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Mark.
All right, guys, take care. See you.